You all straightened out. What is up, everyone? So today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different than what I normally do. Today I'm going to be talking about what the difference is between a survivalist, or what someone would consider a survival expert, compared to a prepper. And what a lot of people don't understand is what the distinction is between the two. And at least in my eyes, they're basically polar opposites. As a philosophy when it comes to surviving in a quote unquote shit hit the fan scenario. So I kind of filled out a list of kind of what the similarities and differences are between the two of them. And I'll kind of be going over those. So all disclosure, I would consider myself a survivalist. I am by no means a survival expert, but my skills and my focus is more on that side. So if you feel like I'm biased, I feel like I should just disclose that I tend to lean on the side of a survivalist. So in my eyes, at least, or from what I have observed, a survivalist is very focused on skills development and their ability to start a fire with basically just wood, or multiple different materials, to procure water, to be able to find and forage for food, potentially hunt for food, be, really not reliant on things, but on their mind and on their ability to think. Whereas for a prepper is very focused on the procurement and the storage and protection of things. If you think about it, a survivalist is very nomadic. They tend to move to environments that, are likely going to be easier to survive in, have more food, have more place to forage for, whereas a prepper is going to be more stationary. They have their storage of their preps. They have, their rice and their food, or in their other foods, and their water and their gas and all that sort of stuff. And basically their main focus is keeping those preps, protecting those preps, but also making sure that they have enough to store them for a long period of time. So with the anticipation of this ever possible shit hit the fan situation, I said scenario. Basically, a survivalist is focused on always practicing and developing new skills. So for me, I recently started learning how to, or I shouldn't say learning, but being better about making fire out of really natural materials. So not relying on a ferrocerium rod, not relying on a lighter. Those are the two easiest ways to basically start a fire, but also have the ability, if I lose my ferro rod, or if I lose a lighter, then I at least have the ability to start a fire with a bow drill or with a hand drill or something like that. Whereas on the other side, a prepper will have literally a desk full of Bic lighters or a drawer full of ferrocerium rods. And, those things are typically 10,000 strikes or whatever they are. If you have a desk drawer full of lighters and ferro rods, you're not going to run out of them in your lifetime. So there's that. Another thing I found is survivalists tend to work along with the environments that they're in. So they're going to build a shelter based on the environment that they're in. They're going to look for food based on the environment they're in. So if it's wintertime, they're probably going to be mostly focused on hunting, and of that food that will have a higher level of fat. Whereas for a prepper, they tend to just try to protect what they have. Since they're prepared, they have more of a flexibility, and they have, food, they have water, they have things that can sustain them throughout an entire winter. So they don't really have to worry about hunting, or they don't really have to worry about foraging for food, because they have food. They have that with them. As I had mentioned before, another thing that's the difference is a survivalist is nomadic. They're going to travel if it gets cold in one environment, or if they're in a mountainous environment and winter is starting to settle in, they're going to travel downhill. They're going to travel south to try to find an area where they can find food, like it's more available. They can hunt, they can live more comfortably without being, so bound with clothing and stuff like that. Whereas A prepper is going to be dug in. They'll have a house, or they'll have a bunker or something like that they have prepared. And basically their focus is protecting themselves. They don't really have to move because they have everything that they need, at least in a nutshell. Now, there's a few advantages to some and disadvantages to others. And these are what I have found mostly, it's a philosophy that's split so 50-50. It's like Republicans and Democrats. It's like, vegans and meat eaters. It's very split down the middle. And there's some people that can lean either way. And there's some people that are complete polar opposites. So this is mostly discussing the polar opposites. But one thing that I found with preppers, from going through scouts, from working at Cabela's, and just from being part of like the camping and survivalist community, is preppers tend to be kind of fat and out of shape. And some of that is by just their culture, and some of that is also by necessity. Like if you're a diabetic, you don't really have a choice of being a survivalist. You have to have storage of insulin. You have to have storage of something that's going to, basically medical supplies that's going to keep you alive. Because once that runs out, or if you're exerting yourself too much, then it could potentially kill you. Whereas for survivalists, they tend to be more in shape because, really they're used to moving. They're used to carrying 60-pound backpacks. They're used to doing things on the move because that's kind of their nature. They need to be in shape to walk 40 miles. They need to be in shape to run away from a situation that's potentially deadly. That's really kind of one of the main differences between the two of them. Another one is your security. So for a survivalist, your security is really based on, there's obviously fight or flight. Survivalists tend to be the flight group. And it's not like this manly thing. Really, if you think about it, if you shot a deer and a bear comes into the area, and you either have to kill the bear or you have to basically run for your own safety. Survivalists will tend to run for their own safety because there's always a chance that you're going to find more food. It doesn't make sense to sit and fight a bear over the meat for a deer because it could potentially kill you. Whereas a prepper tends to be more prepared. If you have an AR, or if you have an AK or something, some rifle that you could just shoot the bear with, boom, now you got more meat. So having that weaponry and that ability of security, a prepper has to have security because they have to protect what they already have. So if you just spend all day saving rice and saving beans and saving all these things to basically prepare yourself, but you don't have anything to protect it, I could just walk onto your property and kill you, and now your preps are now mine. Whereas a survivalist, we obviously, since we're nomadic as well, we have a limited weapon storage. You might have a pistol with you, or you might have, some people might only have a knife. Some people might have a spear or a bow and arrow, but things that are light that you can carry, but also you can use to protect yourself. So fight or flight, survivalists tend to flight, preppers tend to fight. But when it comes to hand-to-hand fighting, hand-to-hand combat, I would say that the survivalists actually tend to be more prepared in that situation. That's a skill that they have to develop because they don't have a lot of weapons to keep people at long distance. So sometimes they might actually have to fight hand-to-hand to get out of a situation or to save themselves. They're much less reliant on weapons to basically survive. And part of that is, being physically in shape and having the ability to fight for a sustained period of time. Whereas for a prepper, they're much more reliant on their weapons. So when it comes to, and they're typically out of shape. So when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, they're at a severe disadvantage because if they run out of ammunition, if they get caught off guard and they don't have the ability to really, fight in close quarters, then they're likely going to lose. Another thing, and this kind of goes along with the physical fitness and the nomadic side for a survivalist, is in a shit hit the fan scenario. Let's say you're in a city and you need to get out to a safer area. And for a prepper, you need to get home so that you have so you're in the area where your preps are. Basically, if you're stuck on foot, it's going to be very easy or above average ability to get out of there for a survivalist. They're typically in shape. They're used to walking for long periods of time, and they're used to basically prioritizing their survival over really anything else. They're not going to be mindlessly following the crowd. They're not going to be mindlessly, just taking to the highway to try to get out of a situation. They will likely have, scenarios kind of figured out where, okay, if this were to happen, here's a map. This is where I'm going to be traveling to. That's kind of how survivalists would take things. Preppers aren't all that different. They're going to have a plan. They're going to have a map, and an idea of where they're going to go, typically to where their preps are. But at the same time, since they are mostly out of shape, it's going to be a lot harder to get there on foot, because it's just, they're not used to walking for long periods of time. They're typically, and if you ever watch Doomsday Preppers, almost every single one of them has tons of vehicles that they use everywhere because, God forbid, they walk a little bit. But they're going to be mostly reliant on cars or motorcycles or something to get out of that area fast. Now, along with that, a survivalist typically, they might have an EDC, like a light carry with them. They might have a knife, a flashlight, maybe a lighter. But they typically don't carry a ton of stuff, whereas a prepper tends to carry a lot more. So they might have a get home bag or a go bag in their car or with them at all times. Who knows? I mean, some people are a little intense with prepping. With that, a survivalist can easily hide in plain sight. If I just have an EDC on and I'm in plain clothes, it's a lot harder to tell that I'm prepared and that I have, a weapon on me. I have a flashlight, I have the ability to make a fire, that sort of thing. It's a lot harder to tell. Whereas for a prepper, really, if you meet any of them, they are almost all dressed in military style clothing, 5'11" everything, fucking grunt style this and all these different clothes that in the grand scheme of things, they stick out like a sore thumb. If I see somebody that has a CCLD or CCDL sticker on the back of their car, that's the first car I'm breaking into, because there's a much higher chance that there's going to be a gun in there than there is anywhere else. So, with preppers, they tend to kind of stick out like a sore thumb. And so if it were a elongated survival situation and you really are hurting for food or supplies, then in reality, that's the first person that you're going to go for, because they're so much more obvious with their clothing, with their backpack, and likely they're going to have supplies that you don't. So one little tip for preppers: be a little less obvious. Wear a little bit more plain clothes and able clothes, but plain clothes. So those are just kind of the main differences. I think both have their advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, a survivalist, you don't have a ton of food stored up. You don't have a ton of supplies stored up. You have the ability to find things, but depending on the environment that you're in, it might be very hard to find water. It might be very hard to find food. And in the time in between finding water, finding food, finding shelter, you're suffering, and your chances of dying are a lot higher. Whereas for a prepper, you have all those things prepared. You have all those, all the food, all the water, all the gas that you really need. Typically, you're in a typical shelter, but if somebody finds out about that, then you're a much higher risk of being, somebody trying to take your stuff or kill you. So there's advantages and disadvantages to each. I think that they can learn from each other. I think that preppers need to focus a lot more on skills development. I think that survivalists need to focus a bit more on security and having food prepared and stuff like that. Obviously, there's a yin yang to every scenario. I think that the two communities can learn from each other. I think I'm fairly prepared, but I'm not a prepper in the least bit. I've gotten comments on some of my pages like, "Oh, happy to see other preppers out there." I'm not one, but I have skills prepared, and I have some supplies prepared, because I see the yin and yang. I see the difference and the similarities and the things that we can learn from each other. So I think both communities are very valid. I personally prefer the survivalist side because I would prefer to have a set of skills over a group of things. So I hope you guys learned a little bit about the differences and similarities between a survivalist and a prepper. Definitely make your own decision on things, but try to mix both communities and try to have an open mind when it comes to survival and living through a shit hit the fan scenario, because obviously it's all concept until one day it actually happens. So stay vigilant, be prepared, and I will see you guys next time.